This morning from the second chapter of Luke, verses 1 through 7. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration, was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to God.
So we are here on that rare occasion where the fourth Sunday of Advent and Christmas Eve are on the same day. For these last several weeks, we've been marking time, counting the days down toward Christmas during this season of Advent, this season of preparation, this opportunity to reflect more deeply on who we are and who God is and what God might be doing in our lives by having this baby be born into the world. What does it mean to you that Christ is coming, that God is coming to us in the Christ child? In the book we've been using during Advent for study and for preaching all the good, they write these sentences. Advent is that foundational story for all of us who follow the Christian faith. It is that time of reminding us who we are and to whom we belong. It is the story of our beginning that points to our future and gives us hope for what is yet to come. So often, this time of year, even though it's Advent in the church, it's kind of a mad rush toward Christmas as year-end school programs and extra church opportunities and shopping and trip planning and parties all begin to converge. All good things. And yet sometimes stacked one on top of another during December, it begins to make this holiday and this holy day feel more stressful rather than joyful and hopeful. And it's hard to avoid the bad news of rising drug addictions and suicides and homelessness and war in Ukraine and war in the Middle East and hate and violence breaking out in cities across our own country. Not to mention our own personal struggles we carry in our hearts. There is so much that can steal our hope. Even for Mary and Joseph, they're traveling, not going on a vacation, but forced to travel for this registration. Well, Mary is great with child, living under Roman occupation where someone else is making decisions for them and how their lives might unfold. And then Luke tells us while they're on this journey that the time came for her to deliver her child. No more waiting. The time has come. On this fourth Sunday of Advent, on this Christmas Eve, the time has come for us to decide if we will receive the love and light, the peace and hope that God is offering us in the birth of this child. Reminded me of a story I read years ago about a 92-year-old woman. She was petite, poised, and proud. She got up early every morning, got dressed, fixed her hair, put on her makeup, and had a full day of activities. She was living a full life. But then her husband passed away. And because her eyesight was failing, She was forced to face that day, a dreaded day, the day she hoped to avoid, where she was having to leave her home of so many years and move in to an assisted living residence. The day came. She was waiting in the lobby, seated in a chair, sitting erect, ready to go. But the minutes passed, one after another. It seemed like it was an eternity before finally the attendant came out and called her name. She took a grab of the bars of her walker and stood up and smiled and began to follow the attendant down the corridor. The attendant, as they had been well trained to do, began to describe how beautiful the room was going to be and how wonderful living here was going to be. But she was surprised when right in the middle of it, the older woman said, "I love it." And she said, "We're not there yet. You haven't even seen it." And she said, "Oh, honey, happiness is something you decide on ahead of time. It doesn't matter how the furniture is arranged. What matters is how I arrange my mind. I've already decided I'm going to love it here." The attendant said she was so surprised by hearing those words, and yet she realized they were words of wisdom for her to live by. They were such a marvelous statement of faith, of a decision to live in a certain way, not dependent upon external circumstances, but dependent on her internal state, her mind, and her heart. Advent gives us this opportunity to decide ahead of time that we're ready to receive the love of God, that we're ready to embrace the hope and the grace and the joy of this great good news of Jesus, this baby being born. Advent is a marvelous opportunity to decide that now is the time for us to pay attention to God's love flowing into our lives. The authors of this little book, All the Good, say Christmas is just the beginning. Are you ready for God's love to be born anew into your life? Are you doing things that feed your soul? Are you ready to receive the good gifts of God? Are you focusing on love and light and joy and peace and hope? Or are you letting something else dominate this season through which we're living? Just a couple of weeks ago, my family gathered to celebrate the second birthday of my first grandson. How amazing to have a child born into the family and all the things it kind of sets off within us. We live in town. They live in the metro area, so we get to see this little guy growing up every week. But his other grandparents live out of town, and they want to know, too, what's happening every day. So my son-in-law is kind of a computer guy. He set up an app where we can send messages and photos and videos every day. So I knew it was going to help them stay up on his first words and first steps and reactions to new food. But what I didn't realize, what surprised me, is how it connected all of us with his activities every day. I know every morning if he's feeling good or has caught a cold, if he's staying home or going to the park. We get to see through pictures and videos and messages all the things he's doing. It keeps us connected in a way that I didn't really expect. It keeps us focused on his life and how it's progressing every day. It helps us pay attention and remember all that he has done. Luke and the other early Christians began to gather these stories and capture this narrative of this baby being born into the world to Mary and Joseph. and what he would mean not only to people in that day, but throughout the generations. And these Gospels become a vehicle to carry that story, to help us focus day in and day out, week in and week out, year after year, generation after generation, on what God is doing in the world and what God wants to do in our lives. God invites Mary and Joseph into this story. And because they're paying attention, they get to play a role in this love being born into the world. God incarnate, God in the flesh, coming to us. Today, we are invited into the story. We're invited to pay attention. We're offered the privilege of playing a role in the good news of Jesus Christ being proclaimed to a wounded and weary world that's perplexed and plagued and struggling to hang on to hope. And God has invited us to play a role in that proclamation. We gather together on a Sunday to remember, to remind one another of this great good news. As I was reading over this text during the week and thinking about all the times we'd be gathering today, I actually began to think of what we normally think of as a Thanksgiving hymn that's in our hymnal. It's number 131, We Gather Together. But I want to read you a few of the lyrics because I believe it tells the Christmas story. It says, we gather together to ask the Lord's blessing. He chastens and hastens His will to make known. The wicked oppressing now cease from distressing. Sing praises to His name. He forgets not His own. Beside us to guide us, our God with us, joining, ordaining, maintaining His kingdom divine. So from the beginning, the fight we were winning, Thou, Lord, wast at our side. All glory be Thine. I pray that you not let the external circumstances determine the joy or glory of your Christmas celebration. I pray that the revelation through this Christ child hastens and chastens you forward in faith, that you can grasp that God is still at work, that what was started on that day continues into our day. Beside us to guide us, our God with us, joining, ordaining, maintaining His kingdom divine. So from the beginning, the fight we were winning, Thou, Lord, wast at our side. All glory be Thine. We're invited on this fourth Sunday of Advent, on this Christmas Eve morning, to gather together, to pay attention, to look within and open ourselves to God's proclamation that despite whatever circumstances we may be enduring, that God has come to us, that God is with us, and God's love is being born anew. They tell a great story in the book about a little church that was struggling to survive. They had been at one time a great church with hundreds of people, but now they had dwindled down to less than 10 people showing up for Sunday morning worship. But there was one woman, the matriarch of the church, that kept the faith and kept them all going. And then she had a health incident, and she had to move into a nursing home. And they were all discouraged. And they began to think that their church was now going to close. But then one of them had the idea, what if we would take church to her? And they began to discuss that. They all liked that idea. They decided that the fourth Sunday of that month, rather than meeting at the building, they were going to the nursing home. And so they went to take worship to her. They thought maybe there would be 7 of them. But not 7 showed up. 70 showed up. They had more people than they had had in one of their worship services for decades. They went back the next month. The crowd doubled. 140 showed up. I don't think it's too strong to say that that congregation was reborn. I don't think it's too strong to say that God's love gets reborn in every time and in every place and in every generation in surprising ways. New life, new birth, new love, new hope are being born of God. May it be born in your heart and soul on this very day. Amen. And thanks be to God.